Van Richten's Guide to Vampires. Chapter 1. Introduction. But first on earth, as vampire sent, thy corpse shall from its tomb be rent, then ghastly haunt thy native place, and suck the blood of all thy race. Lord Byron. My name is Dr. Rudolph Van Richten. By my background, I am a scholar and a doctor. As I was growing up in Darkon, I believed it was my destiny to heal people, to treat sickness of the body with the herbal cures I learned from my grandmother. Yet fate flaunted my beliefs. I suffered a personal loss of such gravity and was forced into an act of such trauma that my entire direction of life was forever changed. Even though it still pains me to remember, it is important for the sake of what will follow to recount those unhappy events here. My life in Darkon was placid, enjoyable. I was married to my childhood sweetheart, a golden-tressed girl named Ingrid, and I thought my joy was complete when I learned that my young wife would soon bear a child. I still remember the birth of my son, whom I named Erasmus, meaning beloved in a little-known tongue, as one of the happiest days of my life. He possessed the radiant fair looks of his mother, and from me he inherited a quickness of mind and a sense of honor that set him apart from other children. For 14 summers Erasmus was my pride and joy, and then, tragically, he was taken from me, not by the arms of death, but by purely unnatural agents. When I was treating a woman in a nearby village, my son was set upon by Vistani, the gypsies who wander the lands and travel the strange mists, and swept away. When I returned home, I found him gone. My panic-stricken wife bewailed the circumstances of the dangerous people who had stolen our child. I swore an oath to myself that I would never rest until Erasmus was freed from whatever unholy fate possessed him. Leaving my affairs in the capable hands of my understanding Ingrid, and committing my future to the search, I set off in pursuit. The details of my journey are immaterial here. The trail was cold and difficult to find. Suffice it to say, I finally tracked the Vistani to Richten. Erasmus was not with them, but I extracted his whereabouts from the gypsy leader. They sold my son, I learned. Sold him into servitude, to a local landowner who styled himself Baron Metus. I hurried to the home of the Baron and demanded that he return my son immediately. I can still, to this day, recall my first glimpse of Metus. He was a tall man, slender and graceful in his movements. His pale face was fine of feature, and his eyes were as black as pools of ink. As he heard my demand, his thin, expressive lips curled into a smile that could only be described as exceedingly cruel. He laughed coldly and turned his back on me. I was escorted from his property by his minions. I camped that night just outside the walls surrounding Metus' land, and darkness and despair enfolded me. But then around midnight, Erasmus came to me. He had evaded the Baron's soldiers and climbed the wall. He had something horrible to tell me. I think that I knew the truth even before he spoke the words. As soon as I saw the ivory pallor of his face under the moonlight, as soon as I glimpsed the dark pits that were his eyes, the words he uttered only confirmed what I already knew. My son was dead. Yet still he walked. Life and death, death and life, such was his destiny. The Baron was a vampire, and he had passed on that dark gift to my only son. I wept there in the night, cried the inconsolable tears of a terrified child. But the worst was yet to come. My son had something to ask of me. The dark gift had only recently been given, and his thoughts still ran in the patterns of a mortal mind. He felt more kinship with me, with the living, than he did with the Baron and the others of his kind. But, he told me, he could feel those old patterns of thoughts slipping away. Soon he believed the horror he felt for his condition would fade, and he would forget what it was like to be immortal. He would become a monster like the Baron. And so Erasmus begged me to save him from this fate. He begged me to destroy him, right then, that very night. He had even brought with him a sharpened wooden stake and a mallet with which to pound it through his chest. I doubt that anyone could ever truly understand the torment I suffered. My son was dead. In my mind, I knew that to be true. But here he was, still standing before me, talking to me. How could I find the capacity in my heart to kill him? And how could I not? How could I damn him to an eternity of torment? For several hours as the moon sank toward the distant horizon, we talked. We relived together the joyous times we had shared, the poignant memories. We cried together. And then, as the harbinger of dawn tinted pink the sky, Erasmus von Richten lay himself down upon the bosom of the meadow and wordlessly handed me the stake and mallet. Our gazes met for one last time. He closed his eyes and composed himself as if for sleep. I positioned the point of the stake over my son's heart and brought down the mallet. With each blow, the agony of my heart could have been no greater if the stake had been sinking into my own breast. When it was done, I lay beside the body of my son and wept again. I wept until the first rays of the sun touched his young body and reduced it to ash. It took all the effort of my will not to lie down beside the dust that had been my precious son and slip into the darkness of death. Only the thought of Ingrid, waiting anxiously at home, prevented me from taking my own life. I turned my back on the horror and bent my steps to the weeks-long journey home. But I found that horror followed me, in fact, preceded me. When I reached my home, I found my beloved Ingrid dead. There was a note from Metis stating that matters were now in balance. I had taken something from him that he valued. I can only presume he meant Erasmus. And so he had taken from me something that I valued. It was at that moment, as I knelt weeping beside the cold white body of my beloved Ingrid, that my destiny was turned. I had always prided myself on the ability to rid the body of disease or poison. Now I knew that this was as nothing compared to the importance of ridding society of a most evil disease and poison. On that terrible day I swore myself to a new career, the pursuit and destruction of those creatures such as the one that had taken my son and wife from me, that feed on the body of society as a cancer feeds on the body of man. And I swore that my first quarry would be Baron Metis. It has been almost 3 decades since that fateful day. Over the intervening years, I have learned much about my quarry, about the enemies that threaten us all. Today, I feel my advancing age, and I can sense the chill wind of mortality blowing through my soul. It is time to pass on what I have learned, so future generations may pick up the stake and mallet when I am forced to lay them down. Thus, I'm setting pen to paper in the hope that this tome will preserve what I have learned at such great cost. Remember, the fight against creatures of darkness is a difficult and often painful one, but it is a good fight, and one that must be fought. If this work inspires but one person to follow in my footsteps, then I have succeeded, and my life's work has not been for naught. Chapter 2. The Background of Vampirism. In almost every culture, on almost every world, tales of vampirism exist to strike fear in both small children and grown adults. These tales are generally considered folklore by sensible people, and indeed, it seems that the existence of the living dead is both implausible and impossible. Why then do cultures so separated by distance and time that they have not even the smallest commonality share nearly identical tales of supernatural creatures that drink the blood of the living? I recorded tales of a place called Kryn, and a race of sea elves who claim that if one of their race is buried on land, it will rise from the dead to seek vengeance on its brothers by drinking their blood. A native of another world called Toril tells a tale of a great undead beast that used to be a man. This beast roams the plains and searches for lone people to attack. The tale relates that it eats the internal organs of its prey. From still another place called O'Earth, a man has told me of a family curse that causes the firstborn male in every 12th generation to rise after death, to drink the blood of the family, unless the body is burned at burial. These 3 worlds, so far from the lands of the mist that I know them only by story and rumor, share many tales speaking of once living men walking the land and slaying the living. Can this be coincidence? Rather, it would indicate that these tales can only be truth, speaking as they do of undead lords who tread upon the domain of the living. The question of origins. How did vampirism get its start? If new vampires are spawned by other vampires, as virtually all tales would have us believe, how then was the first vampire created? These questions have plagued sages as long as the undead monsters themselves have plagued mankind. Perhaps the answer lies in Barovia. The gift, or curse, of immortality was not thrust upon Strahd von Zorovich, Lord of Barovia, by another vampire. Rather, he stole it from the lips of death. I quote the following text from the diary of the bard Grigory Kolyan, who supposedly was captured by Strahd only to be released sometime after with the complete story of the creature. I do not know why Strahd allowed Grigory to leave with this vital information. Perhaps the vampire felt a need to have his story told after years of exile and secrecy. September 8th, 4:53. Barovia is a strange place now, although I cannot exactly put my finger on any changes. There is a physical nature to this change. Colors are not as vibrant, sounds not as immediate. But the major change is in the people, in the lifeblood of the land. As near as I can tell, the change began about 2 years ago. I can remember a day when I used to play my songs in the local taverns and people would dance and sing. Now they seem satisfied just to sit and drink and talk in hushed whispers. There is a dampness over their souls, like a dreary autumn day. November 2nd, 4:53. I'm on to something. It seems that my feelings about the people of Barovia have not simply been my imagination. There is a source, a spiritual suppression, if you will, behind the changes. I have no means of verifying this, no magical detection devices that will lead me to it. I have only my heart and my love for the land and its people. March 29th, 4:54. For nearly 5 months I have searched for the answer to the puzzle. Barovia is in danger and no one else seems aware of it. I would swear to it. But it's not a danger to which people respond. Not a physical enemy at the gates of a city or the border of a land. The enemy is within the hearts and minds of the Barovian people. Just last week I purchased some supplies from the market. The merchant packed the items, handed them to me, and then turned away before I could pay him. It was as if he didn't care about being paid. Very odd, almost self-destructive behavior pervades Barovia. I have many suspicions. Many would call them paranoid, would say my mind has become unbalanced. On certain days when the sun warms the land and the birds sing in the trees, I myself doubt my certitude. But then I find my eyes drawn up to the castle on the hill, Castle Ravenloft. What mysteries do its walls hold within them, walls that are tall and unyielding like the secrets of an old man's heart. Strahd von Zorovich has ruled Barovia for over a century and has not been seen in half that amount of time. Each day the knowledge comes upon me with more certainty. I must learn more about this dark enigma of a man, and I fear I must do the unthinkable, go to the castle itself, and investigate its enigma firsthand. April 8th, 4:54. Fear, cold and dripping, like blood from a hanging corpse, has been my constant companion for several weeks. The closer I get to that accursed Castle Ravenloft, the stronger I feel the grip of terror's icy hand. There can be no doubt now as to the source of Barovia's plight. April 10th, 4:54. I need search no longer. The object of my quest has not only appeared to me, but sequestered me away within his foul domicile. Late last night he appeared in my room like some silent apparition from the grave. Ordering me to take up my quills, inks, and parchment, he seized me and leaped out my window to his waiting coach. This confirmed my suspicion that Strahd von Zorovich is other than a natural man. You see, for my window is 4 stories from the ground. April 15th, 4:54. For 5 days and nights I have literally been Strahd's prisoner in Castle Ravenloft. Strange how the castle seems so warm and cozy inside, not the lurking horror its external visage portrays. I have discovered many things about Strahd, and may scribe them later in a tome dedicated to such an endeavor. I feel, however, that this task will never be accomplished. For how can this man allow me to live when I know such dark secrets about him? He has shared himself, all his intimate secrets with me as if I were his dearest friend. Not a man. Strahd walks the land as a vampire, a once living creature that now feeds on the blood of the living. Although there are endless details about his actions, mannerism, and appearance that I wish to portray, in this journal I will only pen one aspect of him, his transformation from living to undead. And I will do so immediately, lest I forget the smallest detail. It is a great testament to the sleepy, lethargic nature of Barovia that no one has questioned the rule of Strahd von Zarovich. He rarely, if ever, shows himself publicly. Hence, it has been puzzling that he has ruled Barovia unchallenged for more than a century. I now know the answer to this riddle, but I am no more comforted. In life, Strahd was tossed upon a sea of emotion and jealousy. His greatest jealousy was toward his brother, Sergei, who was young and handsome. To add to this, Sergei had the love of a beautiful girl named Tatiana. Envy swept over Strahd like a breaking sea, for he too loved Tatiana. As time passed, these natural emotions twisted into grotesque forms. His love became an overwhelming need to possess the object of that love, and envy grew into spite, and eventually into hatred. At first, Strahd merely intended to frustrate Sergei's plans to marry Tatiana, but then Strahd's mind, apparently already twisted, broke, and he decided that only the death of his younger brother would give him what he wanted: sole possession of Tatiana. He planned this assassination, this fratricide, in private, and so he thought, in silence. But in his overwrought state, Strahd was given to speaking aloud as he strode his chambers alone. An officer of the guard who was a personal friend of Sergei walked the battlements just beyond Strahd's window and overheard the elder von Zorovich's plans. Stricken with horror, he knew that he had to warn Sergei at once. He turned to leave his post at the battlement, but as he did, the scabbard of his sword struck the stonework. Strahd heard the faint sound. Immediately, he snatched up his own weapon and hurled himself out the window onto the battlement. With a curse, he aimed a whistling cut at the guard's head. That officer was a veteran swordsman, however, and parried the cut. Although he had no desire to harm Strahd, his master, the officer was now forced to defend himself. By Strahd's account, the battle was fierce, and will make for a great song, should I live to compose it. Both men were excellent swordsmen, Strahd from his years as a general, and the officer from his constant training. Yet Strahd's madness gave him the edge, and he finally struck down the officer. But not before he himself had taken a wound that would have slain a lesser man instantly. Strahd von Zarovich was as good as dead. In his mind, he knew that, but his hatred and rage would not allow his failing body peace. As the lifeblood poured from his body, Strahd made a pact with death. He reached over, grabbed the dead guardsman, and drank the blood from the corpse. Strahd would now live free from death forever, cheating that dark and shadowy figure. But the pact required another act to be completed. He would have to kill his brother Sergei on his wedding day to finally seal the wicked contract. Strahd hid the guard's body and continued with his day-to-day affairs, awaiting Sergei's wedding day. As time passed, Strahd found his charade more and more difficult to maintain. The daylight hours were becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and the naked rays of the sun physically painful to his skin. He also found it difficult to eat food, which hardly satisfied his hunger. The transformation to whatever creature death had in mind for him was beginning. On the day of the wedding, Strahd sought out Sergei and instigated a fight, intending in this way to give himself some justification for killing the young man. Strahd expected his young and fit brother to be a challenge to defeat, but quickly found that his physical strength had increased far beyond its previous limit. With but a single cruel blow, Strahd felled his brother, and his pact with death was complete. Strahd von Zarovich had become a vampire. No doubt, perceptive readers will have noticed the same gaps in this narrative that I spotted when it first came to my attention. For instance, how exactly did Strahd von Zarovich strike a pact with death? As death is merely a cessation of life, what possible manifestation of this natural condition could propose or accept such a pact? It is questions such as these that force me to doubt the complete veracity of Gregory's tale. Perhaps this famous bard could not resist the urge to embellish upon the tale told to him by von Zarovich, although the diary entry shows little of the internal consistency and stylistic brilliance characteristic of tales known to have been written by Gregory Kolyan. More likely is the possibility that von Zarovich lied to the bard for his own reasons. This might explain Kolyan's eventual escape or release. The vampire wished to use him to spread misinformation. Or in perhaps the most likely interpretation, von Zarovich lied, but not only to Kolion. Aging humans often color or alter their memories of events that were less than flattering to them. In humans, this tendency appears in just a few years. How great may the tendency to embellish be in a creature that has lived for centuries and can expect to live forever? This interpretation raises a major question. How much trust can we put in anything spoken by Strahd von Zorovich, or by any of his unholy kind?